Baptist podcast, we gather around to talk theology, politics, and the sweet banjo sound. Kevin Thompson leads the way, teacher and preacher too. With a men's quartet, the harmonies ring true. Gather around the mic, let's find our way, singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist podcast, where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along. With a passion for faith and a banjo by our side, we don't deep, we don't hide, we take it all in stride. From parables to politics, every topic on the table, let's harmonize together, let's make it stable. In the chord progressions we find our peace, singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist podcast, where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along.
Theology, politics, and a little bit of banjo. You're listening to the Amputated Baptist podcast. And now, here is your host, the Amputated Baptist himself, Kevin Thompson.
All right, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have Pastor Joel Tetreau. Joel, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I remember you and I did something similar years ago, and I've appreciated you from a distance. We certainly have prayed for you as you've gone through, a few twists and turns with your health, but it's good to see that you're well, and we're thankful for all that you do, man.
Well, I'll let you in on a secret. All of that was just an excuse because I came up with the idea of the Amputated Baptist podcast.
That's fantastic.
So I created all these health problems so that I could actually have the title. Don't feel too bad for me. It was all a scheme to get to this moment here. So,
yeah, well, we do the best we can, but at the end of the day, we can't control what we can't control, and God is in control.
Right.
And so he's going to use that. And if for nothing else, you got a fantastic tagline there, Kevin.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking back. I think we have only met in person one time.
Right.
There in Rockford.
Yep.
You came to Morning Star Church there with Pastor Bob Bixby. And I believe I drove you home, or not drove you home because you're in Arizona, but drove you to a church member's house whose name is escaping me at the moment. But anyway, so we had a nice conversation on the way home. I think we had dinner at Chili's that night.
That's great. Yeah.
And so, I remember food pretty well.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch you and follow you. I'm really thankful for all that you're doing. The podcast, you've had a real ministry of education, and just you've actually had a broad ministry, and I'm thankful for your impact. Yeah.
Well, and I'm thankful for a lot of what you've done. I mean, I'm very encouraged by your posts, especially on social media, on Facebook, and some of your writings. I mean, you've written devotional material, you've written a book on leadership, and you've also written this book here that we're going to be talking about today, 3 Lines in the Evangelical Sand. And so this book really fascinates me. And it really was a page turner for me. Because I remember back in the day, before I even knew who you were, so I grew up in an independent, fundamental, soul-winning, sin-hating, Bible-thumping, pulpit-pounding Baptist church.
Oh, yeah.
And when I started going to college, I went to Pensacola, and it was right around that time where you have the emergence of what you mentioned in the book, and I think it was Bob Bixby who coined it, was the idea of the emerging middle. And you had the sharper iron blog, and you started writing some of this then. And so that was what, like 20 years ago or something like that?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, crazy.
And so now you've with 20 years of hindsight and maybe a little more wisdom, knowledge. You've written this book to describe really what fundamentalism is. And so I thought we'd start with just taking a little bit of a historic idea. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, I'm guessing most of you who are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, you may be in this, what we're going to call a category C fundamentalist camp, where you might actually be a fundamentalist, but you've never used that title or you're not comfortable with that title. And that goes all the way back. We're talking historically about late 1800s, early 1900s, a reaction to theological liberalism from Germany hitting mainstream denominations here in America. And so you have the launch of this reaction movement, which will be called, I think it's, I want to say Curtis Lee Law. I want to say, and so I'll say it. Coined this term fundamentalism. Those will do battle royal for the fundamental, they consider the fundamentals of the faith, those core doctrines that cannot be compromised. There are a lot of things we can fight about and argue about, but this is what makes a Christian. And so they felt like so that was under attack at that time. And so you have guys like J. Gresham Machen, who writes his book, Christianity and Liberalism. You have the publication of The Fundamentals by R.A. Torrey. And so you have these people who are fighting for the faith, yet, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there seems to be, from that movement, you have the beginning of colleges like Bob Jones University, you have the publication of The Sword of the Lord, and so that kind of takes its own track, while at the same, years later, what, the 40s, 50s, you have Harold Ockenjay, who talks about a new type of evangelical. And so resurrecting a term evangelical that's been used since like the Reformation of, we don't want to be like the fundamentalists who are old and crotchety and angry and whatnot. We want to still be historically Orthodox Christian, but going our own way. So we start to have a divergence within people who could be called fundamental. Is that, I think, a fair?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did really well. That's right. So in the and you said it right, in the 1950s, there began to be, from the 1920s into the 30s, all the way even into the 50s, you had a very big tent fundamentalism. And so, one of I've often said, and I think I've made allusion to it in the book, that over the years I've said most of my favorite fundamentalists are dead, and most of them have been with the Lord for a long time. And one of those is Machen. I can't. Gray mentioned Machen. Sorry, Machen has been perhaps one of my all-time favorite fundamentalists, even though I'm very much a premillennial Baptist, and he would be a Presbyterian. But I just love his spirit. It's funny, even though Machen, embraced the Westminster, and even though he was Presbyterian, he would have had a more high church model. He absolutely appreciated, even though he did not agree with the methodology of guys like Billy Sunday.
Yeah.
Very much loved Billy Sunday, and he really appreciated the kind of ministry that Sunday and Moody and others like him, even like Dr. Bob Jones Sr. eventually, a more of a Arminian tilted revivalist approach.
Yeah.
Even though Machen, oddly, funny enough, Machen, at least for a while, was associated with a Presbyterian group, which is just over the top ironic to me. But it was a big tent fundamentalism. So, I mean, you had everything as a matter of fact, the fundamentals, the documents that was edited by R.A. Torrey, when those first came out. I mean, it was like Methodists and Lutherans and
Right.
Presbyterians and Congregationalists and Baptists and you name it. And like it was first generation fundamentalism, which I continue to argue was the most healthy
Right.
generation of fundamentalism that we've ever had. And so, but what happened was that after 20, 25, 30 years, um, there was a earlier version. This deserves its own book, and I have no desire to. I don't enjoy writing. I write only because I feel like I have to. I'm primarily an emoter that's forced to write stuff down, but because I don't know what I'm doing with writing, I'm not a good writer. I have to ask editors and proofreaders to help me get through that. But
Well, you've hidden that well.
okay, well, you're most kind. I will say this, that as we think about new evangelicalism, which type A, type B, and type C in the book, I'm making the case that all three of those categories are theological grandsons
Yeah.
of legitimate fundamentalism.
Right.
And so type C evangelicals, type C fundamentalists are conservative evangelicals who have no time for ecumenicalism.
Yeah.
So therefore, they would not qualify as new evangelicals,
Right.
despite the accusation of type A's and even a few type B's who might accuse type C's as being new evangelical. That's not fair. That's not historically accurate, and that's not right at all. Type C evangelicals, they are conservative evangelical men who take a stand against ecumenicalism, and
Right.
historically they are fundamentalist, but they're so afraid and turned off by many who brandish the name fundamentalist that they run from the label because it just doesn't serve their purpose.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, there was a large rift between the group that would become Billy Graham type of new evangelicals from, card carrying fundamentalists who would have been more strict with secondary, with separation,
Yeah.
first separation, and even eventually what we would call secondary separation. There began to be a rift, and it was led by Billy Graham was a popularizer. Christianity Today became
Right.
a publicizer, and the brick and mortar was Fuller Seminary.
Right.
And so Charles Fuller, he had a staff of younger men, and that was Ockengay and Henry and Archer and these guys. And so I think even I can't remember which one, may have been Ed Carnell. One of them said something to the effect that fundamentalists are, they have no fun, too much damn, and too little mental.
Yeah.
And so and it's funny, they essentially said, we believe in their theology, but we have an entirely different methodology.
Right.
Instead of being separated, we'll infiltrate and we'll engage the larger society, science, and the world, and we'll gain a foothold for Christ. Well, I had a mentor, Dr. James Singleton, my pastor growing up at home, growing up as a child, and he used to say concerning that first run of new evangelicalism, well, eventually the infiltrators became infiltrated.
Yeah.
And but even though that's the case, even though fundamentalism to this day largely rightly sees the fight that they had as liberalism as a righteous fight, and it was righteous. And I would agree that the fight that fundamentalism had with new evangelicalism was also righteous. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
The fights internal between A, B, and C has been disastrous
Right.
and has often been nonsensical. And it's not that those issues don't deserve a discussion, but I continue to contend that we ought not to be fragmenting over the areas that we have been fragmenting over ever since the 1950s.
So we're using the term fundamentalist, not in a negative sense, but and that's what I appreciate. But let me go to your definition, how you define it here. The short definition of fundamentalist is an evangelical with courage. I like that. Long definition: fundamentalist is an evangelical who is militant. I think that's a key word for the gospel and is committed to orthodox biblical theology that the historic church, in consensus, has identified as essential Christianity. A fundamentalist will stand against those who distort the faith. those who do this act like fundamentalists. And so that does involve a range of different groups and a range of different people. And so you've come up with this classification here. You already mentioned A, B, and C, and you've even added an A plus that kind of describe those branches. So, as you say, grandchildren of fundamentalism. So, a fundamentalist is one who stands for the faith in an uncompromising way, stands for those fundamental core doctrines, and we're not going to associate with those who would compromise on those issues. So we're not going to have cooperation with liberalism, those who want to deny the fundamentals of the faith. And so in that, you have everybody from your Sword of the Lord subscriber to the guy who just went to the 9 Marks conference.
Right.
Even though both of those groups, well, I mean, we're talking about the A plus to the C right there in the spectrum. Both of those groups probably wouldn't have a lot of fellowship with each other.
No,
they're still related.
They would not. I mean,
no.
Honestly, the two guys look at each other. Matter of fact, Leadership Magazine has this cartoon. I love it. It's a long-haired pastor with a man bun. It's some community church looking at a guy that's got a King James version and a suit and tie. And in both of their minds, they're shaking each other's hands. And the little caption reads, "There, but for the grace of God, go I."
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in, I would say this A plus category.
Yeah.
And began to casually shift toward more of an A, getting into a B, and then finally, I think if I had to pick one, I'd probably be in that C. Because as you mentioned, because I grew up with the fundamentalist label, that was a once a very proud category I would have contended for. But now it's almost like, oh man, because of that, I don't want the association with that term any longer.
Sure.
Because I'm not a King James only, no movie theater, women can't wear pants type of guy. But neither am I just a strict, Ron Hamilton only, though I appreciate Majesty Music and other groups. But I don't know if I'd, sliding over into categories. So let's talk about these categories.
Yeah.
So the A plus, King James only. This is a pastor-driven, the man of God.
Right.
You got to dress up for church. Dancing is a thing that leads to pregnancy or whatever. It's almost, I don't want to say cult-like, but it's in that direction where it's like it's a very us four and no more type thing.
Sure.
Yeah, they're gonna. It's dispensationalism. You've got here Hiles Anderson, West Coast. I'd throw my Pensacola in there, although I think they're kind of moving.
I think so.
A little bit. From when I went.
Yeah.
And so so then that's the A plus. I'll throw Sword of the Lord in, Shelton Smith, and all of that. And then you've got the A, which is culturally fundamentalist, and not necessarily Baptist, because you've got guys like Bob Jones, you've got Methodists, you've got Presbyterians quite a bit.
Yep.
Traditional hymns over new things, but
I'll just say this. The Free Pres, the Free Presbyterian group, the Orthodox Presbyterian group, the Bible Presbyterian, which even though they're Westminster, they're also very dispensational.
Yeah.
I mean, there are all kinds of, historically fundamentalist groups that are not Baptist that very much are, click off this type A. Some of our friends in the ACCC, they have some Wesleyans and Methodists, who are very much militant fundamentalists. And
one thing, a guy like J. Vernon McGee back in the day, solid Presbyterian, but also firmly fundamentalist.
Oh yeah, and part of the group my personal I call it a denomination, but I get in trouble with my denomination when I call us a denomination. The old guys call me Tetreau. We're not a denomination. I said, yeah, well, we kind of are. But I'm part of the IFCA International,
Yeah.
and a lot of us are Bible church guys. And our roots are, we were actually part of the second split off. Initially, the IFCA was essentially fundamentalist Congregationalists and Presbyterians who were taking a stand against liberalism. We actually had a pre-run for 7 or 8 years. That didn't go well. And so we actually redid ourselves. And then we're coming up on 100 years.
Yeah.
So all that to say, J. Vernon McGee was a member of the IFCA.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's part of our, I'll just say it, he was part of our tribe.
Yeah. And so, yeah, these are young Earth guys. They're complementarian, they're pre-mill, all of that. Then you've got the B category, where you've got historic fundamentalism. They're still calling themselves fundamentalists, but they're I don't want to say to the left.
I think they are. I think you
Yeah.
can say that. Yeah.
Okay, so all right, I'll say that. So they're allowing things that others wouldn't, a little more CCM,
Yep.
dancing, maybe at a wedding. It's not going to say.
Oh, no, absolutely. Now, we're not good at it.
Yeah, right.
Like I'm a B minus. I'm either a B minus or C plus, depending on what
Yeah,
day. So like, yeah, you could dance, but I mean, for a lot of us, you probably shouldn't because you're kind of embarrassing. You don't know what you're doing. See, the kids that grew up in Type C ministries, when they dance, they actually know what they're doing.
right, right.
Yeah, I say it in the book. When they were in 8th grade or 12th grade or 10th grade, they actually had dance lesson and they went to the dance and they learned how to dance. So they know what they're doing. But those of us that didn't grow up with that, we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. So I teach at an conservative evangelical school, and at prom we have dancing.
Hmm.
I could just think somewhere, my old professors and my old teachers are rolling over in their graves. They're going to be shocked. I might send them to their grave, knowing what I'm doing now.
So hey, yeah, I said it in the book. You know that in the opening chapters of Bob Jones College, Dr. Bob Jones Sr. and his wife organized dances
Hmm.
for the students at Bob Jones. And if now they weren't they you went to a dance, you went to a nice place, a nice hotel where now this is you got to imagine this is 100 years ago. And
Yeah,
so Mrs. Jones wanted those farm boy preachers to have a little bit of class,
right,
which
right.
wasn't bad. That's actually not bad, and I actually can appreciate that. So they would do these, and of course, this is the deep South, so there would be, ballroom or era appropriate dancing, but they didn't touch. But if you didn't come up with a date, the administration would pick you a date,
Ha!
and so if you could imagine, that's 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that what irony. I mean,
I
that's
would have found that very helpful when I was in college.
oh yeah.
All
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
right, so you get the B, then finally the C, which is
Yeah.
more the evangelical. They don't want that term.
Yeah.
And so you've got a plurality of elders. You've got CCM with a little bit of hymns thrown in, a very doctrinal based idea. This is I'll throw in, like the 9 Marks guys,
Oh yeah.
maybe even Gospel Coalition, where depending
Yep.
on where you're at on that. So guys like that, guys like Dever, MacArthur,
Absolutely. Yep.
Sproul, who earnestly contend for the faith, absolutely, but wouldn't be turned a fundamentalist. They wouldn't use that themselves. I don't think they would even identify with that movement. Though again, grandchildren of the larger picture there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we have all of these, and it just seems like it's
Oh, it's a big tent.
right.
So now I'm not saying that they all like each other, and I'm
Right.
certainly not saying they hang out, but 100 years ago they did hang out.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, is that when you go from type A all the way to type C, that's why in the early fundamentalist conferences, you would have 2 or 3 or 4,000 pastors that would show up,
Right.
And now your little group, now there are some exceptions, but in most conferences today, yeah, maybe there's 500, maybe there's 1,500, but but like, when this first, I mean, there were thousands, I think, and I can't
Yeah,
remember now, but it seems to me like in some of the earliest fundamentalist gatherings, you're talking five, six, seven, 8,000 that would come
right,
together.
right.
Well, how could you have that? Because all these groups would go to the same conference.
Yeah,
So, and it was, all of us are fundamental. And so what I would say is, these today, it's orthodoxy, it's the gospel, we're not into ecumenicalism, and it's things like we're committed to biblical inerrancy.
yeah,
So that's what, so to the left of type C is mainline evangelicalism. I would probably call that type D, as in something other than A, B, or C.
yeah,
But D, they're evangelical. And then to the left of that would be, the left wing evangelicalism. Years ago, Kubido talked about the worldly evangelicalism. So what happens is the further left you go, the more loosey goosey they get
yeah,
with inerrancy. So inerrancy that leads, when you're committed to inerrancy, that's also going to mean that you're going to hold the line on, even a soft complementarianism.
yeah,
But a complementarianism, you're going to be very clear on gender. You're going to be clear on marriage. When you leave the building with inerrancy, it opens the floodgates.
right.
And here's what I would say: historically, in the past, that eventually leads to letting go of the gospel.
Yeah.
So that's why fundamentalists, that's why we draw lines in the sand. We're
So
not
you
going
see
to
a
do
guy
that.
like, it's been interesting to watch the trajectory of a guy like
Oh yeah.
Andy Stanley, who grew up under the ministry of his father Charles, very solid guy, maybe even a category B
Yeah.
uh, guy, large Baptist church there in Georgia, Atlanta, I believe, and just solid. I don't think King James only, but I remember him using it, King James.
Huh.
Um, but he's come out of that as he's a little weird sometimes, but okay. But then as he starts denying some of these other things, start erasing lines. Now we're talking about unhitching from the Old Testament. Now we're getting into some weird stuff. And a guy like Rob Bell, who
Yeah.
started off up in Michigan, doing youth ministry that was somewhat decent. But then, I mean, now I don't know where he is. If there's a letter past Z, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
just weird stuff. So when you lose those fundamentals, you start losing pretty much everything else. You've lost the gospel. Now you're in a feel good cultural compromising position.
Yeah.
Um, but that's where it's interesting because the A plus guys want to put that label on the C and maybe even on the B or whatnot. So I want to. It's interesting that you read this book, and I don't know if it was in conjunction. Maybe you can give us the inside baseball here, but at the same time, Chris Anderson's just published a book,
Right.
the Scandal of Schism or
Yeah.
something like that, um, where he's calling for unity. So, is there any chance that we can go back to a historic fundamentalism? And I kind of think I don't know if the A plus guys are going to do that,
Mhm.
but your A, B, and C, it seems to me like we're going in that direction. I can
Yeah,
remember.
I think we
Yeah,
are, and Chris and I have talked quite a bit. We've actually done some ministry together. We were on a mission
yeah,
trip to South Africa years ago. We love each other, and yeah, we've had good fellowship and interaction. It's interesting. We wrote our books totally in isolation from each other. Like, I knew he was writing, he knew I was writing. We had talked informally, but it nothing. And it's just so interesting. I love Chris, and I really appreciate him on a lot of levels. So yeah, we are saying some of the same kind of things. And honestly, Chris and I are not saying things that have not been said by other leaders like this. We've been saying for quite some time
yeah,
that this is the direction it just needs to go. And what's encouraging is to see I really see the Lord, Bixby called it the emergent middle.
Yeah.
I see God doing something with that where, it's kind of like this. Balanced fundamentalist men out of the fundamentalist movement are noticing to the right of them, their building is on fire. And, they see orthodoxy being violated to the right of them. And so it shoves them a little bit to the left. And then conservative evangelicalism are coming out of evangelicalism, and to their left is their house is on fire with the left wing evangelicals. And so you have almost, guys running out of fundamentalism saying, I really want a balance, and then guys coming out of evangelicalism coming this way. And it's like these two groups are meeting each other and appreciating each other. And so it's been interesting to watch that.
I think it was just a year or two ago, you had there at Bob Jones University had a conference. I think it was a sermon audio conference.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at you had a guy like, it's on the campus of BJ. You've got a guy like the late Dr. Clarence Sexton from Crown College was there, but you also had Paul Washer at conference. I remember my head just exploding, like worlds are colliding here. This isn't supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, because the left has gone so far left that I think these groups need to come together.
Oh yeah.
And
it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily agree on everything. Well,
Right.
we're not. But if we have more in common together, and frankly, too many of our groups and too many of our churches and too many of our ministries, all of us are experiencing too many of our young people running away from the gospel into the world.
Right.
And we're contending with real liberalism, not supposed liberalism, because some guy has a little music that you don't have in your church. Oh, come, stop. Right. I mean, we're dealing with much broader issues, bigger issues. I'm sorry, real issues. That really undermine the gospel, so that we don't have time. I think I use this illustration in the book. If there in World War II, you're on D-Day, you're there on the beaches of Normandy, and the enemy is firing at you, and you hop into a foxhole, and you're a U.S. soldier, maybe a paratrooper or a Marine, and you hop in the foxhole, and it's a Canadian troop, a Canadian military. Well, you're just thankful that you have each other.
Right.
We're not going to argue over whose uniform is prettier right now. I mean, that's so, yeah. And so that's what I would say, is that the day and age demands that we have appreciation for the unity that we have in the gospel and the clarity that we have with orthodoxy. Yeah.
So we can still maintain, and you talk about this in the book, you can maintain a biblical idea of separation, yet still have unity within the body of Christ.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right.
So again, the book we're talking about is 3 Lines in the Evangelical Sand, type A, B, C, Fundamentalism by Pastor Joel Tetreau. We want get the book. I'll have it linked in our show notes. This is a book I just devoured because it's great. Something I can relate to very much. I'm highlighting it like, oh yeah, know that guy, know that guy, know that guy. Been to this place, been to that. And so it was a fascinating look and really encouraging for me to read and to mull over. So thank you for writing this. You're not a writer, you say, but I think this book speaks for itself, that you might have more talent that God has gifted you with that you're not.
That's kind. Thank you, brother. Yeah.
And so make sure you look for that. Again, you can check us out at I just lost the title of my own podcast. It's literally it's right there.
Yeah. The Amputated Baptist Baptist podcast. Amen.
So go to amputatedbaptist.com and you can find the link to that. You can go on Amazon, wherever good books are sold, and get this book. It's a good read. It's You're not going to find a whole lot of theological jargon, but it's going to be it's historical, it's theological, and it gives you a lot to mull over. So, Pastor Joel, thank you for you were kind of moving your schedule around for me, and even skipping a important football game, a bowl game, even.
It's okay. Yeah, ASU lost in double overtime, so it's okay.
So you missed a double overtime. Wow.
That's all right. That's all right.
The things you sacrificed for this podcast.
That's all right, man. That's no problem.
All right. Well, you guys check out that website, and we'll be back next time.
Singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist Podcast, where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along.